This is an MJA Inc. Investigations warning. This MJA podcast is rated E for explicit. Some details of a case and language used on this podcast might be upsetting to some of our listeners. Listeners' discretion is advised. And for those who are still with us, kick back and enjoy the show. Welcome to our MJ podcast. This series, Children Who Never Made It Home. Episode 7, Part 5. 3 Unsolved Child Murders. One of the most heinous crimes a person could commit are crimes against our children. When it comes to the murder of a child, we always question, who could do such a thing? They must be a pure animal filled with pure evil inside. When the fact is, the killer could look and act normal hiding in plain sight. People who kill children, their brain just isn't wired right. We live in a truly terrible world. Our children are preyed upon, abducted, raped, assaulted, and murdered. Thousands of child murderers are never solved, and their killers never brought to justice. Police spend decades trying to bring closure to families. Parents die without ever knowing who was responsible for their child's murder. On this podcast are 3 such cases: tragic, devastating, and unsolved. Garland, Texas detective Gary Sweet once asked, "What greater honor is there than to work on an abduction and murder of a child?" Just think about that, folks. My name is Mark, and I will be your host for tonight's show. Joining me later will be our co-host, Olivia. We are coming to you from our home office in Hudson, Florida. Case 1. Welcome to New York. On November 9th, 1979, a female murder victim was found in Caledonia, New York cornfield about 20 feet from the south side of Route 20. The unidentified victim was given the name Jane Doe Calley, who ended up being identified some 35 years later on January 26, 2015 as Tammy Jo Alexander from Brooksville, Florida. Case 2. Welcome to Texas. On June 1st, 1982, 15-year-old Michelle Garvey went missing from New London, Connecticut. On July 1st, 1982, a body was discovered buried in a field in Baytown, Texas. After 30 years, 15-year-old Michelle Garvey was identified in January 2014 as being the Jane Doe found on July 1st, 1982 in Baytown, Texas. Case 3. Welcome to Indiana. On the afternoon of February 24th, 1987, 10-year-old Linda Weldy's bus dropped her off near her home on McClung Road. It was reported by the bus driver and other children that they saw Linda walk towards the family mailbox as she did each day. The bus drove off. 10-year-old Linda Weldy was to walk 250 yards down a curved gravel driveway to her home, which was hidden by trees. Linda Weldy never made it home. Let's take a pause for the cause, and when we return, we will have Olivia on the line. Be back in a moment. When there is an ending, there was a beginning. Every victim has a picture to paint. Every true crime has its time and place. Please join our MJ podcast, the series Deep into the Woods, Missing Persons, Unsolved Crimes, and the Does. Welcome to our MJ podcast, this series, Children Who Never Made It Home. This is episode 7, part 5, 3 Unsolved Child Murders. We have Olivia on the line. How are you doing on this fine evening?
Doing well.
Okay, let's dig into these unsolved mysteries that's been committed against our children. Case
They're
1.
hard to do.
Yeah, very hard. Case 1. Welcome to New York. This Jane Doe became our 39th case on February 6, 2002. Victim 1. On November 9, 1979, a passing motorist discovered a murdered female victim in a Caledonia, New York cornfield. The female lifeless body was about 20 feet from the south side of Route 20, about 1.5 miles from the intersection of Route 5. She became known as Jane Doe Calley, who was fully clothed, and there was no evidence that she had been sexually molested. Jane Doe's pockets had been turned inside out, possibly to remove any identification. The coroner estimated that Jane Doe was killed the previous night from 2 gunshot wounds, one to the front of her head and one to her back. The gunshot wound to her head was inflicted prior to the one in her back. They estimated Jane Doe Calley's age as 13 to 19 years of age. Jane Doe Calley was shot by the road where a blood spot marked the earth and then dragged in the cornfield and shot again. Police speculated that the murder weapon used was a .38 caliber handgun. Ballistic experts dug up a slug buried in the dirt underneath the victim and tested it against literally hundreds of other bullets fired from guns seized by police. Over the years, the Livingston County, New York Sheriff's Office probes traced weapons as far as Canada, Europe, and Mexico, but they were never able to match the slug to a murder weapon. An examination of Jane Doe's stomach contents turned up pieces of meat, corn, and potatoes. A waitress from a small diner in Lima, New York, remembered seeing the girl the night before the murder, but she couldn't remember anything more. An unknown male was seen with the victim at the diner near the location where Jane Doe was discovered. The unknown male is described as a white male, 5'8" to 5'9", with black wire-rimmed glasses and a plaid shirt. He was driving a tan station wagon with side paneling. Most potential forensic evidence was washed away by heavy rain on the night that Jane Doe died. But they knew that she had not come from the Caledonia area from a distance warmer location because she had tan lines on her upper body. Sun tanning booths in 1979 were very rare and were only used by the rich and famous. Jane Doe Calley was laid to rest at Mount Moore Cemetery in Dansville, New York. The inscription on her gravestone reads, "Lest we forget an unidentified girl, November 9th, 1979, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest." In September 2005, her grave was exhumed in order to test her teeth in hopes of identifying minerals found in drinking water to help aid in her identification. Pollen samples taken from the victim's clothing were determined to have come from only 4 places: Arizona, California, South Florida, or Mexico. Serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to her murder in 1984. However, no evidence supported this claim. Lucas died in 2000 in prison. Police have followed up on over 10,000 leads, all leading nowhere. Since 2002, MJA has been working with Livingston County, New York Sheriff's Office on trying to help ID Jane Doe Calley and her killer. After 35 years, on January 26, 2015, the Livingston County, New York Sheriff's Office announced that Jane Doe Calley was identified as 16-year-old Tammy Jo Alexander of Brooksville, Florida. MJA is still working with the Livingston County, New York to ID a suspect in her killing. MJA has given him a name of a very high-profile suspect that matches the composite sketch and the vehicle he drove. Law enforcement in Florida claims that serial killer Chris Wilder is the #1 suspect. The problem with that is Chris Wilder has a very deep receding hairline, where the composite sketch shows a man with a full set of hair and wearing glasses. Chris Wilder never drove a station wagon or wore glasses. Our suspect owned the same type of station wagon, wears glasses, and has a full set of hair. Our #1 suspect is Marlon Young from Pennsylvania, who at the time is in his early 80s, living in the state of Washington. Our investigation continues, and I just live a few miles away from Brooksville, Florida.
Case 2, welcome to Texas. Victim 2. On June 1st, 1982, 15-year-old Michelle Garvey went missing from New London, Connecticut. On that date, she was reported as a runaway who may have been heading to either New Jersey or North Carolina. Although investigators attempted to find her, her trail went cold. 15-year-old Michelle Garvey remains just another runaway. July 1st, 1982, Body was discovered buried in a field in Baytown, Texas. It was a teenage girl who had been strangled and likely sexually assaulted. No bra or shoes were recovered, and the shirt had also been unbuttoned. Jane Doe was probably buried only hours after her death. The body was exhumed in May 2011 to obtain a DNA profile to compare to potential matches. An amateur online sleuth, Polly Penwell, came across the cases of Garvey and the unidentified body. Penwell suggested to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and the Harris County, Texas medical examiner that they could be the same person after she compared both cases while using a website known as Web Sleuth. Penwell said, describing her interest in unidentified people, I felt so much sadness for them. After 30 years, 15-year-old Michelle Garvey was identified in January 2014 through the efforts of National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and by the Harris County, Texas Police Department, who had contacted her family and obtained samples of the DNA for testing in August 2013. Since the 15-year-old female's identification, authorities have continued their investigation, now aimed at finding Garvey's murderer. It was revealed that the 15-year-old Garvey likely ran away from home, escaping through a window, and probably hitched a ride with an unknown driver. Authorities expressed interest in how the victim arrived in Texas and what the motive for her murder may have been, as well as who may have transported her to where she later died. Garvey's case was also possibly connected to other Texas killing fields murders, although no link has been officially determined. But she was buried near two other unidentified murder victims, the Harris County, Texas Jane Does. After being returned from Texas to Connecticut, Garvey's body was reburied by her family on March 1st, 2014, in Montville, Connecticut.
Case 3. Welcome to Indiana. Victim 3. Unsolved kidnapping and murder. On the afternoon of February 24, 1987, 10-year-old Linda Weldy's bus dropped her off near her home on McClung Road. The time was about 3:30 p.m. It was reported by the bus driver and other children saw Linda Weldy walk towards the family mailbox like she did each day. The bus drove off. 10-year-old Linda Weldy was to walk 250 yards down a curved gravel driveway to her home, which was hidden by trees. Linda Weldy never made it home. The kidnapping and murder of 10-year-old Linda Weldy. Linda Weldy's family thinks a serial killer is to blame for her murder, but police are skeptical. Linda was 10 years old when she was abducted from the bus stop in 1987. 10-year-old Linda Weldy's body was found 3 weeks later. Weldy's killer is still out there. It's been 36 years since Linda Weldy was kidnapped and murdered, with no arrests being made. The 10-year-old Weldy's mother, Karen, has felt every single minute of those 36 years. It never goes away, it never heals, and when something like this happens to your child, it's unspeakable. Karen went on to describe her child. Linda Weldy was a happy 10-year-old girl. She loved fishing and riding her bike. The 10-year-old Weldy was a riot, and she was so funny. Weldy loved this TV show called Mork and Mindy. Life was good. Police say on the day Linda disappeared and was murdered, Karen's then-boyfriend, Robert, who she later married, was at home at the time. Robert and Karen's 12-year-old son were in the front yard installing an antenna. Karen, Linda's mother, worked a late shift at her job, so Karen didn't realize Linda didn't make it home until she talked with Robert and he asked where Linda was. Karen says Linda often went over to friends' houses after school. When they realized Linda was unaccounted for, her mother, Karen, went to the police. Karen just kept clinging to the hope that Linda would come home and that Linda would be found safe. There was still that fragment of hope that Linda Weldy would come home. That fragment of hope shattered 22 days later. 10-year-old Linda Weldy's body was found by a farmer along some long-abandoned railroad tracks on County Road 500 South near Kingsbury, Indiana. Linda Weldy had been strangled to death. Karen, Linda's mother, identified the body as being her daughter, 10-year-old Linda Weldy. According to newspaper reports at the time, police said they believed the person or people responsible for her murder possibly knew Linda. But her family has a different theory. Linda's mother, Karen, believes that suspected serial killer Larry Hall murdered Linda. Could a serial killer be the blame for Linda Weldy's death? Hall is believed to have abducted and killed several girls throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. At this time, Hall is serving a life sentence in Texas on a federal kidnapping charge. Hall has never been convicted of murder. Hall has an act of confessing to different cases, giving 2 to 3 facts of the case, and then one false fact about the case. What that does is contaminate it as far as law enforcement is concerned, and Hall would also recant his confessions. This is Hall's way of not facing more charges that would lead to the death penalty. Police say Hall would use his van to abduct women and girls and then murder them. While LaPorte County investigators know of Larry Hall, they are skeptical that he committed this crime. Investigators note similarities with Hall's M.O. and the Weldy case. Hall could be a person of interest, but based on the results of the ongoing investigations, investigators believe that there were other persons who held a higher sense of a person of interest in the case. These are suspects that were developed in this case, but our investigators are holding that info very close to the vest. That means there are still no answers for Linda Weldy's family. The family photos of Linda Weldy will forever end at the age of 10. The suspects know who they are and what they did. It's time for them to help a grieving family. Do you know something? We would like to ask for anyone that has information to please come forward and contact the LaPorte County Sheriff's Office Detectives Bureau at 219-326-7700. And I'd like to say on this case that I had contact with the leading investigator on this case because I had a possible suspect for them to run through the data bank, but he was very convinced that he was on the right path. And then plus I met some podcasters. Their podcast is called The Cold Case Chronicles. They done a 6-part episode on the Linda Weldy case. I mean, they went in depth like an investigative reporter do. I mean, they interviewed everybody they could interview. They interviewed them, and it was a.
Well, you know what? I think I heard about that case. Or was there another case with a little girl by a school bus stop that got abducted? It sounds familiar to me.
Well, it's one of the ongoing cases, the only one like it in Indiana, and the other one is 6-year-old Shannon Sherrill. It's that happened in '86. That's another one. It's the only one like it in Indiana.
The school bus, right? By the school bus stop, they just disappear. The bus driver drops them off and they disappear.
Well, not
they don't live right.
Not Shannon.
They don't
Shannon was it was on a Sunday and she was playing hide and go seek with her friends.
Oh yeah.
But
No,
Linda Weldy, Linda Weldy was at school bus, and there is other cases out there where the same thing happened. You know? So
what if people just like hang out at school bus places and watch kids? You know, it's disturbing when it's involving children.
Yeah.
I told you Mike and I have been watching, like, I don't know, the serial killer cases and stuff. And I think Gacy, he was into children too. Wasn't Dahmer also into young?
Well, yeah,
He was into young
young
boys.
young boys, yeah, mostly young boys, yeah.
I couldn't get through Dahmer. I had to like turn it off. I couldn't. It was getting me sick to the stomach.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of sick people out there, and you know, I know law enforcement can't solve every crime, but I don't know. There's just, like a colleague of mine had said, and I think, Mark, I talked to you last time we talked, spoke to you about this. You could be walking down the street and you don't know. You could be walking next to a serial killer. They're just so many of them anymore,
Yeah, yeah,
and they
that's
just come
true.
out of nowhere,
Yeah, yeah,
And like he said, there's a part of their brain that they compartmentalize, and then there's that other part of that brain where most of them, they live a normal life. They have a family, they're married, and they have a job.
yeah.
And it's just a sickness. And, when it comes to children, that's just anyone, but children, it's I don't know, it's just more disturbing.
Yeah. I want to thank Olivia for being on the show tonight. I want to also give a special thanks to our viewers and listeners for tuning in, for y'all have been so kind. I have a quote for you all. Hope is the only bee that makes honey without flowers. Robert Greene Ingersoll. Always remember, folks, that if you ever get bored with nothing to do, well, take a walk deep into the woods. You might be surprised at what you might find. That's the end of our MJ podcast series, Children Who Never Made It Home. This has been episode 7, part 5, 3 Unsolved Child Murders. We say to all of you, good night from Hudson, Florida.
What does it look like in heaven? Is it peaceful? Is it free like they say? Does the sun shine bright forever? Have your fears and your pain gone away? Here on earth it feels like every day good is missing since you left. And here on earth everything's different. There's an emptiness. Oh, I hope you're dancing in the sky, and I hope you're singing in the angels' choir. I hope the angels know what they have out there. It's so nice up in heaven since you arrived. Now tell me, what do you do up in heaven? All your days filled with love and light. Is there music? Is there art and invention? Tell me, are you happy? Are you more alive? 'Cause here on earth it feels like every day good is missing since you left.